There was no moment, no single bad decision, no obvious turning point, just a long series of things that each made perfect sense at the time. And now you're here, looking at something that got much larger than you ever intended it to get. And you're not sure exactly when that happened. You try to find the day, you go back through the months, you look for the decision that changed something, and it isn't there. There is no day, there is no decision. There is only the slow and quiet accumulation of things that never once felt significant while they were happening. That is the part that takes a moment to sit with. Not that something went wrong, but that nothing felt wrong while it was going wrong. Think about the last time you said yes to something small. Not a major commitment, not a life-altering decision. Something small. A subscription you didn't really need, but it was only a few dollars. A convenience that cost a little more than the inconvenient version. A routine purchase that had become so routine you stopped noticing it. A small comfort you started reaching for regularly because it made a particular moment easier. None of those felt like decisions. They felt like nothing. They felt like the background noise of a regular week. And that is exactly why the accumulation remained invisible. The brain is not designed to evaluate repetition. It is designed to evaluate events. Something happens. The brain registers it. Something happens again. The brain registers it less. Something keeps happening. The brain stops registering it entirely. That is not a failure of attention. That is how attention is built. Attention is drawn toward change, toward difference, toward the new thing that just appeared, not toward the thing that has been there every month for 3 years. This is why you can name almost every significant financial decision you've made in the last decade. You remember the large purchases. You remember the times you hesitated. You remember the conversations you had before making a major commitment. You do not remember most of what accumulated, because accumulation doesn't arrive as a decision. It arrives as a default, and defaults don't get reviewed. Defaults just continue. There is a version of this that happens with spending. A subscription added during a free trial that was supposed to be temporary. A delivery upgrade that seemed worth it one particularly busy week and then never got turned off. A platform kept open for something you were going to do, and then never did. None of them felt like decisions to keep paying. They felt like nothing, like background, like the kind of thing you'd get to eventually, and eventually kept moving forward. There is a version of this that happens with time. A commitment that started small. An obligation that arrived with a reasonable explanation. A yes that felt too minor to question, and too minor to refuse. Then another one. Then another one. And somewhere over months you found yourself with less time than you had before, and no clear memory of deciding to spend it differently. You didn't decide. You accumulated. There is a version of this that happens with lifestyle. The apartment that was an upgrade from something harder. The car that felt reasonable after driving something older. The standard of small daily things that shifted upward so gradually you only noticed when you tried to shift back down. Each step felt justified at the time. Each step was only slightly different from the step before it. The distance between the beginning and where you landed was built one small justification at a time. None of it felt like drift. All of it was drift. The dangerous part is not that the individual choices were wrong. Most of them weren't. A subscription here is not reckless. A small upgrade there is not irresponsible. A routine comfort that costs a few dollars is not a financial catastrophe. The dangerous part is the word that goes invisible inside each of those statements. Here, there, a few. Those words are doing a lot of work. Here means this time and also every following time. There means this category and also every similar category. A few means this amount multiplied by every month for as long as the default continues. The individual choice was small. The accumulated choice was not, and the accumulated choice was never actually made. It happened one individual choice at a time until it didn't need to be made anymore. It was already made, somewhere in those months, in all of those small, reasonable moments. The thing you would have questioned if you had seen it clearly was already in place by the time you were in a position to see it clearly. This is what makes it exhausting in a way that a clear mistake isn't. A mistake has a shape. It has a date. It has a moment you can point to and say, there, that's where the wrong turn was. Accumulation doesn't have a date. It has an approximate period, a general stretch of time during which things shifted, without any one thing shifting dramatically. There is no moment to return to. There is no single decision to undo. There is only the result of 1,000 small moments, each of which seemed fine on its own. And that is a different kind of weight. Not the weight of regret, not the weight of guilt, the weight of realizing that careful is not the same as protected, that evaluating individual choices correctly is not the same as understanding what those choices are building. You were careful, you were thoughtful, you did not make reckless decisions, you made reasonable ones, over and over again. And the accumulation was not made of recklessness, it was made of reason. That is what makes it hard to hold. If the accumulation had been made of bad decisions, there would be something to fix, a habit to break, a pattern of choices that were clearly wrong that could be clearly corrected. But the accumulation was made of ordinary choices, normal choices, the kind of choices that don't feel like choices because they feel like life. This is the part of accumulation that stays invisible longest, not the amount, not the total, the mechanism, the way that small things become the normal background of a life, without ever announcing themselves as anything important. Every subscription that continued had a reason to continue. Every small comfort that became routine had a reason to feel reasonable. Every obligation that added itself to an already full schedule arrived with a justification. Nothing looked like accumulation. Everything looked like a single thing. And single things are not what you build defenses against. You build defenses against large things, against obvious mistakes, against the decisions that feel significant when you are making them. Single things that don't feel significant pass through those defenses without effort, because they were never the target. The target was always the big decision, the big risk, the obvious turning point, not the Tuesday afternoon choice that felt too small to think carefully about, not the recurring charge that was too minor to review, not the slow expansion of what normal meant over the course of several years. Those were not targets. Those were just life, until they were not just life anymore, until the accumulated weight of all of them became the thing you are looking at now. The large thing was not made of large moments. The large thing was made of small ones. That does not make it smaller. It makes it harder to understand, because you can understand a large decision. You can trace it. You can analyze it. You can identify what you would do differently. You cannot trace the accumulation of 1,000 small defaults back to a single source, because there isn't one. The source was the mechanism, the way small things become invisible, the way repetition becomes normal, the way normal stops being evaluated, the way defaults outlast the conditions that created them. A subscription made sense when a particular thing was happening. The particular thing stopped happening. The subscription didn't. A comfort made sense during a difficult stretch. The difficult stretch ended. The comfort didn't. An obligation arrived during a time when it seemed manageable. The conditions changed. The obligation remained. And none of them sent a notification. None of them flagged themselves as things that needed to be reviewed. They continued. Because defaults continue. That is what defaults do. They persist in the absence of attention. And attention is finite. And defaults are not. There will always be more defaults than attention available to review them. That is not a personal failure. That is arithmetic. The gap between what accumulates and what gets reviewed is not closed by trying harder. It is closed by seeing the mechanism clearly. The mechanism is not recklessness. The mechanism is not irresponsibility. The mechanism is how small things become invisible while they keep building. That is what you are looking at now, not the size of what accumulated. Not the number, the mechanism, the quiet way that life fills itself with things that each seemed fine and together became something else. You were paying attention. You were paying attention to events, not to accumulation. Nobody taught you to pay attention to accumulation. You learned to notice the thing that changed, the decision that felt significant, the moment that seemed important. You were not taught to notice the thing that quietly persisted through every version of your life, for longer than you ever consciously chose. And now you're noticing it, not because something dramatic happened, not because a crisis forced visibility, because something finally added up to an amount large enough to enter the frame, and you're sitting with the weight of that, not the weight of what you did, the weight of how it happened while each individual piece felt like nothing. That is a specific kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion of realizing that vigilance was not enough. That good judgment in the moment is not the same as protection from the accumulated result of many moments. That being careful with each individual choice does not mean understanding what those choices are collectively building. You are not asleep. You are were not reckless. You were not ignoring things. You were doing what the brain does, evaluating what presented itself, moving forward through the day, and the thing that didn't present itself kept growing in the background. That is where you are now, not having found the mistake, having found the mechanism, the way small things become the shape of a life without ever feeling like a decision, the way you arrive somewhere without having made the choice to go there, without a turning point, without a moment, just the long, slow accumulation of things that each made sense at the time. And now the shape of all of them together is visible. It was always going to become visible. That was never the question. The question was only how long it would take to become too large to stay invisible. Now you know. That is not a small thing. That is what it looks like when a pattern finally has enough weight to be seen. You see it now, and it was already there. The whole time, building, one small, reasonable moment at a time. It doesn't arrive the way debt arrives. Debt has a number, a record you can pull up and read line by line. This kind of weight doesn't come with a record. It comes with a feeling that things are heavier than they were before, a feeling that the week feels fuller than you remember agreeing to, a feeling that the end of the month arrives with less remaining than you anticipated, and you look for what changed, and what you find is that nothing changed, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that would show up on any single line of any record. What changed was everything changed a little, a series of small adjustments, each one invisible, together making something that is no longer invisible, but is very difficult to trace. This is why the exhaustion is not quite the same as frustration. Frustration has an object. Frustration is directed at something specific, at a decision that was wrong, at yourself for something you cannot name. This exhaustion doesn't have an object. It has a duration. It is the weight of realizing that what accumulated slowly over a long stretch of time, that the weight you are holding now was being built during months you thought were fine, during periods you thought were stable. They were normal, and normal was where it was building, not in the exceptional times, in the unremarkable months, the ones that blurred together. Those were the months the accumulation was growing most, quietly, because quiet is where defaults live. They do not need drama to expand. They do not need crisis to persist. They only need time. Not because you weren't paying attention, because the thing that deserved attention did not look like it deserved attention. It looked like the background, and the background does not get examined until one of them grows large enough to become something you have to look at directly. That moment has a specific feeling. It is not the feeling of discovering a mistake. It is the feeling of realizing that something was always there that you were never looking at, not because it was hidden, because it was ordinary, and you were busy living the ordinary days. Nobody inventories ordinary days. That is not how living works. And so the defaults lived alongside you, growing quietly, while you were doing everything else you were supposed to be doing. That is the thing that is hard to hold, not that you failed, that you succeeded at what you were trying to do, and the accumulation happened anyway. You were not asleep. You were not reckless. You were doing what the brain does, evaluating what presented itself, moving forward through the day, and the thing that didn't present itself kept growing in the background. That is where you are now, not having found the mistake, having found the mechanism, the way small things become the shape of a life, without ever feeling like a decision, just the long, slow accumulation of things that each made sense at the time. Now you see the shape of all of them. The question was only how long it would take to become too large to stay invisible. Now you know. That is what it looks like when a pattern finally has enough weight to be seen. You see it now, and it was already there, the whole time, building, one small, reasonable moment at a time.